I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Brenda Harrington's silver Lexus pull into my driveway, 3 weeks before Christmas in rural Montana. My name is Patrick Armstrong, and I own a 100-acre cattle ranch just outside of Bozeman. I had lived here peacefully for 8 years, managing my herd, maintaining my property, and generally minding my own business. That all changed when the developers bought up the adjacent land and built Sterling Meadows, a planned community of oversized houses packed onto undersized lots. With those houses came an HOA, and with that HOA came Brenda. Brenda was exactly what you would picture when you heard the word HOA president. She was 52 years old with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill. Designer athleisure, where that had never seen actual exercise. And a permanent expression that suggested she had just discovered dog waste on her shoe. She climbed out of her Lexus wearing white pants in December, which should have been my first warning that this woman had no connection to reality. "Mr. Armstrong," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss your generator situation." I had been checking the oil on my tractor, and I slowly straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "My what now? Your generator." She pointed at the industrial Generac unit I had installed 6 months earlier, sitting on a concrete pad about 50 feet from my house. "It's an eyesore and it violates our community aesthetic standards." I looked at her, then at my generator, then back at her. "Brenda, I'm not part of your HOA. My property was here first. I'm grandfathered in." "Actually," she said, pulling out a folder that she had apparently been clutching like a weapon, "when you signed the utility easement agreement last year to allow the power company to run lines across your property to our development, you inadvertently agreed to abide by certain community standards." "The hell I did. Page 17, subsection 4. She thrust a document at me. "Any property owner within the Sterling Meadows service area agrees to maintain aesthetic consistency with community standards. Your generator is industrial grade and visible from the Henderson property line. It needs to go." I took the document and actually read it this time. My lawyer had told me it was just a standard easement agreement. Apparently, my lawyer had been wrong, or he had not read page 17, subsection 4. There it was, buried in legal language that would make a dictionary weep. Properties within the service area had to maintain visual harmony with the development. "This is ridiculous," I said. "It's a generator. I need it for when the power goes out. In case you haven't noticed, we get blizzards out here that can knock out electricity for days." "That's what the community backup system is for," Brenda said smugly. "Sterling Meadows has its own auxiliary power supply for emergencies." "Great for Sterling Meadows. I'm not in Sterling Meadows." "But you're in the service area, which means you're subject to the same rules. The generator needs to be removed, or you'll face fines of $500 per day until compliance is achieved." She walked back to her Lexus, her white pants somehow still pristine despite the December mud, and drove off. I stood there holding the document, feeling the first stirrings of anger in my gut. I had lived on this land for 8 years. I had been here before Sterling Meadows was even a concept. And now some HOA president thought she could tell me what equipment I could keep on my own property. I called my lawyer that afternoon. His name was Marcus Chen, and he had handled the property purchase and various ranch legal matters over the years. He listened to my explanation, asked me to email him the document, and called me back 3 hours later. "Patrick, I'm sorry, but they have a case. That clause is enforceable. I should have caught it when I reviewed the easement, but I missed it. I take full responsibility." "So what do I do?" "You could fight it in court, but that would cost tens of thousands in legal fees and the outcome is uncertain. Or you could comply and remove the generator. That generator cost me $12,000, and I need it. Last February, we lost power for 6 days. 6 days. Do you know what happens to a cattle operation when you lose power for 6 days in the middle of winter? I understand, but legally, they have the right to enforce this. I hung up and spent the next hour pacing in my living room. My dog, a border collie named Scout, watched me with concern. Finally, I made a decision. If they wanted to play hardball, I could play too. But I needed more information first. Over the next week, I did my research. I drove through Sterling Meadows, noting which houses had Brenda's silver Lexus parked outside. She lived on Primrose Lane, in a 4,000-square-foot monstrosity with columns that would have looked excessive on the Parthenon. I checked property records and found that she had purchased it 2 years ago for $900,000. I also learned that Sterling Meadows had a central power system with a backup diesel generator that could supply the entire development for up to 72 hours during an outage. I received my first citation on December 10th. It was hand-delivered by a process server who looked apologetic. $500 per day until the generator was removed. I crumpled up the citation and threw it in the trash. On December 15th, I received a letter from Brenda herself, informing me that I now owed $2,500 in fines, and that legal action would be forthcoming if I did not comply immediately. The letter also mentioned that the Sterling Meadows HOA had voted unanimously to pursue full enforcement of community standards. That night, I had dinner with my neighbor Tom Peterson, who lived on a ranch 5 miles down the road. Tom was in his 60s, a weathered Montana native who had forgotten more about ranching than I would ever know. "They are trying to fine you for having a generator." Tom shook his head. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What are you supposed to do when the power goes out?" "Apparently, hope that their community backup system works." "Their system doesn't cover your property though, does it?" "Not technically." But Brenda seems to think that because I'm in their service area, I should just tough it out or get a small, aesthetically pleasing generator that wouldn't actually power anything important. Tom leaned back in his chair. "You know what's coming in 10 days, right?" I nodded. The Weather Service had been tracking a massive winter storm system moving down from Alberta. They were predicting it would hit Montana on Christmas Eve, bringing with it temperatures as low as -30 degrees and potential whiteout conditions. It was shaping up to be the kind of storm that knocked out power lines and kept them down for days. If that storm hits as hard as they're saying, people are going to need their generators, Tom said. An idea began forming in my mind. It was petty. It was probably not the mature, responsible thing to do, but the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. "Tom," I said slowly, "what if I complied with their demands? You're going to remove your generator, I'm going to disconnect it and move it." "Not remove it, just relocate it temporarily so they can't say it's visible from their property line." "And then what?" "And then I wait for the storm." Tom looked at me for a long moment, and then a slow grin spread across his face. "Patrick, that's downright diabolical." "They want to enforce petty rules. Fine. But I'm not going to lift a finger to help them when their backup system fails." "What makes you think it will fail?" "Tom, when's the last time a brand new development had a perfectly functioning backup system on the first real test?" "Those systems need maintenance. They need proper fuel management, and they need someone who actually knows what they're doing to keep them running. I'm betting the Sterling Meadows HOA went with the cheapest contractor and the lowest bid." Over the next few days, I prepared. I had a concrete pad poured behind my equipment barn, completely out of sight from the Sterling Meadows property line. I hired a contractor to help me relocate the generator, and on December 20th, we moved it. The unit was still fully functional, still connected to my house through underground lines. But now it was technically compliant with the HOA's aesthetic standards. I sent Brenda a certified letter with photographs showing that the generator was no longer visible from any Sterling Meadows property. I also included a check for the $2,500 in fines, just to close that particular loop. I wanted no legal complications for what was coming. Brenda responded with a terse letter acknowledging compliance and accepting the payment. There was no thank you, no acknowledgement that she had forced me to spend another $4,000 to move a perfectly functional generator. Just a cold confirmation that I had finally done what I was told. The storm arrived exactly when the weather service predicted. On December 23rd, the temperature began dropping. By the evening of December 24th, Christmas Eve, it was -15 degrees and falling. The wind picked up around 8 at night, howling across the Montana plains like something alive and hungry. By 9, the snow began. I had spent the afternoon preparing. My cattle were in the barn with extra feed and heated water troughs. My house was stocked with food and supplies. My generator was fueled and ready to go. Scout was curled up by the fireplace, sensing the storm's approach with that instinct animals have. At 10:45, the power went out. One moment my house was lit and warm. The next, everything went dark except for the glow of the fireplace. I waited exactly 30 seconds, then walked to the utility room and started my generator. The Generac roared to life, and within moments, my house was fully powered again. Lights, heat, refrigerator, everything. I even had enough capacity to keep the barn systems running, ensuring my cattle stayed warm and watered. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the snow come down in sheets. Visibility was maybe 10 feet. The wind was strong enough to rattle the windows. And somewhere in Sterling Meadows, 300 families were sitting in the dark, waiting for their community backup system to kick in. It did not. I learned later what had happened. The Sterling Meadows backup generator was indeed brand new, and it was theoretically capable of powering the entire development. However, the HOA had decided to save money by performing their own maintenance rather than hiring a professional service. The generator had not been tested under load in over 6 months. When it tried to kick on during the power outage, a fuel line issue caused it to stall. By the time anyone realized there was a problem, the access roads were already impassable due to snow, and no repair technician could reach them. At midnight, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but I answered it anyway. Patrick Armstrong. The voice was male, unfamiliar, speaking. "This is Dale Henderson. I live in Sterling Meadows, backing up to your property. Listen, our power is out and our backup system isn't working. My wife is diabetic and we need to keep her insulin refrigerated. Is there any way you could help us out?" I thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. Dale Henderson had nothing to do with Brenda's vendetta against my generator. His wife's health was not a bargaining chip. "Give me 20 minutes, I said. "Bundle up and meet me at the property line. Bring a cooler." "Thank you. God, thank you so much." I put on my heaviest winter gear, grabbed a high-powered flashlight, and headed out into the storm. The walk to the property line took longer than expected because the snow was already knee-deep, and the wind kept trying to knock me sideways. Dale was waiting with his wife Jennifer, both of them shivering despite their winter coats. "Come on," I shouted over the wind. "My house is about 300 yards. We can keep your insulin in my fridge." They followed me back, and once we were inside, Jennifer burst into tears of relief. "I was so scared," she said. "I kept thinking about what would happen if the insulin went bad." "You're safe now," I told her. "You can stay here tonight if you need to. I have a guest room." "Are you sure?" Dale asked. "We don't want to impose." "It's Christmas Eve, you're my neighbors, and there's a blizzard outside." "Of course I'm sure." They accepted, and I set them up in the guest room. Around 2 in the morning, my phone rang again. This time it was a different Sterling Meadows resident, asking if she could charge her phone and laptop because she had a work emergency. I told her to come over. Then another call came, and another. By dawn on Christmas morning, I had 7 people sheltering in my house, all from Sterling Meadows, all refugees from the HOA's failed backup system. We made the best of it. I cooked a big Christmas breakfast, eggs and bacon and pancakes, using up the food that would have otherwise been my own quiet holiday meal. People were grateful, almost embarrassingly so. They kept thanking me over and over, and I kept telling them it was fine, that anyone would have done the same. But one person had not called and one person had not come asking for help. At 9 in the morning, Dale's phone rang. He talked for a few minutes, his expression growing darker, then hung up. "That was Brenda Harrington," he said. "She's organizing a house-to-house check to make sure everyone in Sterling Meadows is okay. She wants me and Jennifer to come back home." In this weather, I looked out the window. The storm had not let up at all. If anything, it had gotten worse. "She says the roads in the development are passable if you're careful. She has her Lexus running and she's driving around checking on people." "That's actually responsible of her," I admitted. "She also asked if we had been here at your house." I said yes. "She told me we should have stayed in Sterling Meadows, that leaving the development was a violation of the emergency protocols." I stared at him. Emergency protocols. Apparently, during a declared emergency, residents are supposed to stay in their homes or go to designated shelter points within the development. Going to outside properties is discouraged because it makes it harder to track who needs help. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. "You came here because your wife needs her medication refrigerated and they have no power." "I know. I told her that. She just kept saying we should have gone to the community center, that they have supplies there." "Do they have refrigeration?" "No." "Then what exactly were you supposed to do?" Dale shrugged helplessly. "I don't know, but she made it very clear she was not happy that we came here." 2 hours later, there was a pounding on my door. I opened it to find Brenda Harrington standing on my porch, covered in snow, her face red with cold and anger. "Mr. Armstrong, you need to send my residents back to Sterling Meadows immediately." "Your residents?" "They're people, Brenda, not property, and they're here because they needed help. They should have asked the HOA for help. We have procedures in place." "Your procedures include a working backup generator, which you don't have. These people needed power, and I had it. Simple as that. You're undermining the community's emergency response system. I'm keeping insulin from spoiling and giving people a warm place to sleep during a blizzard. If that undermines anything, your system was pretty weak to begin with." Her eyes narrowed. "This is because I made you move your generator, isn't it? This is revenge. This is me helping my neighbors, the same neighbors you're supposedly trying to protect. But here's the thing, Brenda. If you had not forced me to fight over that generator, if you had not threatened me with fines for having emergency backup power, maybe I would have offered to help run power lines to some of your residents. Maybe I would have worked with the HOA to create an actual emergency plan. But you decided to make me your enemy over aesthetics, so now you get to deal with the consequences. I could sue you for interfering with HOA operations. Good luck with that. I'm on my property, helping people who came here voluntarily. No court in Montana would side with you." She stood there fuming for a long moment, then turned and stalked back to her Lexus. She gunned the engine and fishtailed down my driveway, nearly sliding into a fence post. The storm continued through Christmas Day and into the night. By December 26th, we had accumulated 37 inches of snow, and the temperature had dropped to minus 28 degrees. Power was still out throughout the region, and the utility company was saying it might be another 48 hours before service was restored. The roads were starting to get plowed, but travel was still dangerous and discouraged. I had a steady stream of Sterling Meadows residents throughout this time. Some came for a hot meal, some came to charge devices, some came to warm up for a few hours. I helped everyone who asked. My generator ran continuously, burning through diesel fuel, but I had planned for this. I had a 1,000-gallon tank that I kept full for exactly these situations. The only people who did not come were the ones Brenda specifically told not to. I learned through the grapevine that she had sent out a mass email on Christmas night, instructing all Sterling Meadows residents that going to the Armstrong property was a violation of community rules and could result in fines. Some people ignored her. Others, afraid of the HOA's power, stayed in their cold, dark houses and waited for the power to come back on. On December 27th, the roads were finally clear enough for repair crews to reach Sterling Meadows. They discovered that the backup generator had multiple issues, not just the fuel line. The system had been improperly installed, inadequately maintained, and was never going to work reliably. Fixing it would require parts that were on backorder and could take weeks to arrive. The main power came back on December 28th, 4 days after the initial outage. By that point, I had hosted over 40 different people at various times, gone through 700 gallons of diesel fuel, and cooked enough food to feed a small army. I was exhausted, but I was also satisfied. I had done the right thing, regardless of Brenda's attempts to politicize a natural disaster. What I did not expect was the fallout within Sterling Meadows itself. On January 3rd, I received a phone call from Dale Henderson. "Patrick, I thought you should know. There's going to be an emergency HOA meeting tonight. A bunch of us are planning to call for Brenda's resignation. Because of the generator failure, that's part of it, but also because of how she handled the emergency. She told people not to go to your house, even though you were the only one with reliable power. Some families with young kids were freezing because they were afraid of getting fined. It's not right, and people are angry. I appreciate you letting me know, but that's an internal HOA matter. I'm not part of your community. You kind of are, though. I mean, you helped more people during this storm than the HOA did. That matters to us." The emergency meeting happened that night at the Sterling Meadows Community Center. I did not attend, obviously, but Dale called me afterward with a recap. "It was brutal," he said. "At least 100 people showed up. Brenda tried to control the meeting, but people kept interrupting her, asking about the generator failure and why she told people they couldn't go to your property. She kept deflecting, saying the contractor was at fault and that she was just enforcing community rules. Did it work? No. Someone pulled up the maintenance records and showed that the HOA had only done one test of the backup system in the past year, and that was just turning it on for 10 minutes. No load test, no fuel system check, nothing. Then someone else pointed out that we had paid that contractor over $50,000 for the installation and setup, and that Brenda's brother-in-law owns the contracting company. I sat up straighter. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Nobody knew because she never disclosed it. It's a clear conflict of interest and probably violates the HOA bylaws." What happened then? People started calling for a vote of no confidence. Brenda tried to shut down the meeting, but the vice president took over and held the vote anyway. She lost, 73-12. She's no longer HOA president. I let that sink in. Who's the new president? For now, the vice president, Carol Matthews. She's already said her first priority is fixing the backup generator properly and reaching out to you to apologize for how you were treated. I don't need an apology. I just want to be left alone. I know, but I think she wants to make things right. Carol Matthews called me the next day. She sounded tired but sincere. Mr. Armstrong, I want to apologize on behalf of the Sterling Meadows HOA for the way you were treated regarding your generator. The enforcement action was inappropriate, and we're in the process of reviewing the utility easement agreement to remove that clause. I appreciate that. I also want to thank you for helping our residents during the storm. You had no obligation to do that, especially after how Brenda treated you, but you did it anyway. That speaks volumes about your character. I just did what anyone should do. Not everyone would have, though. Listen, we're organizing a community appreciation event next month, and we'd like to honor you for your help during the emergency. Would you be willing to attend? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to say no, to just go back to my quiet life and forget about Sterling Meadows and the HOA. But another part of me recognized that most of the people in that development were good folks who had been let down by poor leadership. They deserved better. I'll think about it, I told her. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal. My cattle were fine. My ranch operations continued, and the weather improved. I had the generator moved back to its original location, and this time, no one complained. The HOA formally rescinded the violation notice and refunded my $2,500 in fines. But the story was not over yet. In early February, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Billings. My stomach dropped as I opened it, expecting some kind of lawsuit from Brenda. Instead, it was something far more interesting. The letter informed me that a group of Sterling Meadows residents had filed a class action lawsuit against Brenda Harrington and the contracting company owned by her brother-in-law. The allegations included fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and negligent endangerment. The lawsuit claimed that Brenda had steered the backup generator contract to her brother-in-law's company, despite the existence of lower and more qualified bids, and that the resulting faulty installation had put residents at risk during the storm. The letter asked if I would be willing to provide a deposition about the events of late December, specifically regarding my interactions with Brenda and my observations of the failed backup system. I called the law firm and agreed. The deposition took place in March, in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and legal pads. Brenda's lawyer was there, a sharp-dressed woman who tried her best to make me look like I had some kind of vendetta. I answered every question honestly and calmly, explaining the timeline of events from the initial confrontation about my generator to the storm and its aftermath. Isn't it true, Mr. Armstrong, that you were angry at Miss Harrington for enforcing the HOA rules? The lawyer asked. I was frustrated, I said, but I complied with her demands. I moved the generator and paid the fines. And then you refused to help Sterling Meadows residents during the emergency, correct? That's completely false. I helped over 40 people during the storm. I opened my home, shared my food, and provided power when the HOA's system failed. The only people I turned away were the ones who didn't ask for help. But you didn't offer to help the HOA directly, did you? After being threatened with fines for having emergency equipment. No, I didn't volunteer to help the organization that had been harassing me, but I helped my neighbors, which is what actually mattered. The deposition lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs shook my hand. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Your testimony is going to be very helpful. The lawsuit dragged on through spring and into summer. I tried to stay out of it as much as possible, focusing on my ranch and my cattle, but I kept getting updates from Dale and other Sterling Meadows residents. The case was apparently building momentum, with more evidence emerging about Brenda's mismanagement and the sweetheart contract with her brother-in-law in August. Something unexpected happened. The FBI got involved. I learned about this when 2 federal agents showed up at my ranch on a Tuesday afternoon. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Williams and Special Agent Torres, and they had questions about the HOA situation. Mr. Armstrong, we're investigating potential wire fraud and mail fraud related to the Sterling Meadows Homeowners Association. We understand you had extensive interactions with the former president, Brenda Harrington. I did, but I don't know how that would involve federal charges. The HOA solicited funds from residents for the backup generator project through mail and electronic communications. If Miss Harrington knowingly misrepresented the project in order to steer the contract to her brother-in-law, that could constitute fraud. We're gathering evidence to determine if federal charges are warranted. I told them everything I knew, which honestly was not much beyond my personal experience. They thanked me and left, but their visit left me unsettled. This whole situation had escalated way beyond a simple HOA dispute. The federal investigation moved faster than the civil lawsuit. By October, Brenda Harrington and her brother-in-law, a man named Keith Murphy, were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. The indictment alleged that they had schemed to defraud the Sterling Meadows HOA out of at least $100,000 through inflated contracts and unnecessary work. The trial began in January, almost exactly 1 year after the storm. I was called as a witness for the prosecution, not because I had direct knowledge of the fraud, but because my testimony established the timeline and demonstrated the consequences of the failed backup system. I sat in the witness box and answered questions about the generator dispute, the storm, and the aftermath. Brenda sat at the defense table, looking small and defeated in a conservative gray suit. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a well-meaning volunteer who had made some poor decisions, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed that Keith's company had massively overcharged for the generator installation, and email records proved that Brenda had hidden his relationship to her from the HOA board. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for less than a day, guilty on all counts. Brenda Harrington was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution of $120,000 to the Sterling Meadows HOA. Keith Murphy got 5 years and was ordered to pay an additional $200,000. The civil lawsuit was settled shortly afterward, with the defendant's insurance company paying out a substantial sum to the affected residents. I followed all of this from a distance, watching as the situation I had stumbled into morphed into a major legal case. It was surreal, in a way. All I had wanted was to keep my generator and live my life. Instead, I had somehow become a central figure in a fraud prosecution. In March, 2 years after the original storm, Carol Matthews called me with an update. "Patrick, I wanted you to know that we've finally gotten our backup generator properly installed and tested. We went with a different contractor, obviously, and we've set up a professional maintenance schedule. We also revised our HOA bylaws to require disclosure of any conflicts of interest and to mandate regular testing of all emergency systems. That's good to hear. I also wanted to invite you to a community barbecue we're having next month. It's not a formal event, just neighbors getting together. We'd love to have you. This time, I said yes. The barbecue was on a sunny Saturday in April. I brought Scout, who immediately made friends with a dozen kids and at least as many other dogs. People came up to me throughout the afternoon, thanking me again for my help during the storm, asking about my ranch, and generally treating me like I was part of the community. It was nice, I had to admit. Sterling Meadows would never be my favorite place. Too many houses too close together for my taste, but the people were good. They had learned something from the whole debacle about accountability and community and the importance of actually preparing for emergencies instead of just checking boxes. Dale and Jennifer found me near the grill, where I was loading up a plate with hamburgers and potato salad. "Patrick, we never properly thanked you," Jennifer said. "You saved my life, you know. If my insulin had spoiled during that storm, I don't know what would have happened. You would have been fine. Someone would have helped. But you actually did help. That matters." We talked for a while, and they told me about how the settlement money from the lawsuit was being used to upgrade various community systems and build up an actual emergency fund. The HOA was functioning better now, with more transparency and resident involvement. As the sun set and people started heading home, I stood at the edge of the development, looking out over my ranch in the distance. Scout sat beside me, leaning against my leg. A voice spoke from behind me. "Beautiful view." I turned to see Carol Matthews holding a glass of lemonade. "It is. I'm lucky to have it. We're lucky you're our neighbor, even if our previous president didn't realize it." "How is the HOA doing, really?" "Better. We have actual oversight now, and people pay attention to what we're doing with their money. It's more work, but it's healthier. We learned that the hard way. Most important lessons are learned the hard way." She nodded, sipping her lemonade. "Do you ever regret getting involved in all this?" "I mean, you just wanted to keep your generator and live in peace." I thought about it, really thought about it. The stress, the legal proceedings, the disruption to my quiet life. But also the people I had helped, the satisfaction of standing up to bullying, and the knowledge that some actual good had come from the whole mess. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret it. Sometimes you have to stand up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it means letting your neighbors freeze." I didn't let anyone freeze. I let the HOA fail. There's a difference. The people who needed help got it. The system that tried to punish me for being prepared got exposed for the fraud it was. That's not revenge, that's just consequences. Carol smiled. "Fair enough. Well, for what it's worth, we're glad you're here, and your generator is welcome anytime." I drove home that evening feeling better than I had in a long time. The last 2 years had been chaotic, frustrating, and occasionally infuriating. But they had also proven something I had always believed, that doing the right thing, even when it's hard or unpopular, matters. My generator sat on its concrete pad behind the barn, exactly where I had moved it to comply with Brenda's demands. I could have moved it back to the original location after the HOA rescinded the violation, but I decided to leave it where it was. It worked just fine there, and honestly, having it further from the house reduced the noise when it was running. I did make one change, though. I installed a transfer switch that would allow me to run power lines to adjacent properties if needed. If another storm hit and Sterling Meadows lost power again, I would be ready to help not just with shelter and food, but with actual electrical power. It cost me another few $1,000s, but it seemed like the right thing to do. The following winter was mild, with no major storms. My generator sat idle except for monthly test runs. The Sterling Meadows backup system was tested regularly and maintained properly, ready for an emergency that never came. In March of that year, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a woman in her 30s, dressed in business casual, carrying a notebook. Mr. Armstrong. My name is Rebecca Foster. I'm a reporter with Montana Living magazine. I'm doing a story about community preparedness in rural areas, and your situation with the Sterling Meadows HOA came up in my research. Would you be willing to talk to me? I almost said no. The last thing I wanted was more attention. But then, I thought about other people who might find themselves in similar situations, dealing with unreasonable HOA rules or struggling to maintain their independence in the face of bureaucratic pressure. Sure, I said. Come on in. The interview lasted 2 hours. Rebecca asked thoughtful questions about rural life, emergency preparedness, dealing with HOAs, and the importance of maintaining self-sufficiency. She took photos of my ranch, my generator setup, and even Scout, who posed beautifully with the Montana landscape behind him. The article came out in May, a 6-page spread titled Standing Ground: One Rancher's Fight for Preparedness. It was fair and well-written, focusing not on the drama but on the underlying issues of property rights, emergency planning, and community responsibility. The article mentioned Brenda's conviction, but did not dwell on it, instead using the story as a jumping-off point for a broader discussion about how communities can balance aesthetic concerns with practical needs. I got letters after that article came out, dozens of them. People from across Montana and neighboring states writing to share their own HOA horror stories, to ask for advice, or simply to say they appreciated what I had done. Some of the letters were heartbreaking, stories of elderly people being fined for minor yard infractions, veterans being told they could not fly American flags, families being forced to remove playsets because they violated community standards. I could not help all of them, but I did what I could. I connected people with good lawyers, shared information about HOA reform movements, and generally tried to be a resource for folks who felt powerless against their neighborhood associations. One letter stuck with me particularly. It was from a woman in Idaho named Susan Wright, who was fighting her HOA over a medical ramp her disabled husband needed to enter their house. The HOA claimed the ramp was not aesthetically consistent with the neighborhood and had demanded its removal. Susan was desperate. Her husband could not access their home without the ramp, but she could not afford the legal fees to fight the HOA. I called her that evening. Susan, my name is Patrick Armstrong. You wrote me a letter about your husband's accessibility ramp. Oh my God, yes. I can't believe you actually called. Tell me exactly what's happening. She explained the situation in detail. Her husband had been in a car accident 2 years earlier and used a wheelchair. The ramp was a simple wooden structure, well built and maintained, but the HOA wanted it removed or relocated to the back of the house, which would require her husband to go through the garage every time he wanted to enter or leave, a significant inconvenience and safety issue. Have you contacted disability rights organizations? I asked. I have, but they say it could take months or years to resolve, and the HOA is threatening daily fines starting next week. I thought for a moment. Susan, what if I helped pay for a lawyer? A good one who specializes in disability rights and HOA law. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, why would you do that? Because I can, and because it's right. No one should be forced to choose between accessibility and bankruptcy. I connected Susan with Marcus Chen, my lawyer, who referred her to a specialist in disability law. The case was actually pretty straightforward. The Fair Housing Act protected the right to make reasonable accommodations for disabilities, and an accessibility ramp was textbook reasonable. The HOA backed down within a week of receiving the lawyer's letter, and Susan's husband kept his ramp. She called me afterward, crying with relief and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you. Just pass it on. Help someone else when you can." That became my unofficial mission over the following year. I could not fix every HOA problem in America, but I could help a few people, and those people could help others, and maybe, slowly, things would improve. My ranch continued to operate smoothly. The cattle were healthy, the land was productive, and I was content. Sterling Meadows settled into a comfortable rhythm next door, with Carol running the HOA competently and transparently. We had an informal agreement that if either side had an emergency, we would help each other out. It was how neighbors should operate, and it felt good to have that understanding. In November, I was invited to speak at a community preparedness conference in Billings. They wanted me to talk about emergency planning for rural properties, particularly regarding backup power systems. I was not a natural public speaker, but I agreed because the topic mattered. The conference was held at a hotel convention center with about 200 attendees. I gave a 30-minute presentation covering generator selection, fuel storage, maintenance schedules, and integration with existing electrical systems. I also talked about the importance of building community relationships before emergencies happen, using my own experience as an example. During the Q&A session, someone asked, "Do you think HOAs serve a legitimate purpose, or should they be abolished?" I considered the question carefully. HOAs can serve a legitimate purpose. They can maintain common areas, organize community events, and handle shared infrastructure. The problem is when they overreach, when they prioritize aesthetics over function, or when they are run by people who see rules as ends in themselves rather than tools to serve the community. Good HOAs are transparent, accountable, and focused on actually helping residents. Bad HOAs are petty fiefdoms run by people who enjoy exercising power over their neighbors. The challenge is making sure you have the former and not the latter. The audience applauded, and several people came up afterward to share their stories and ask for advice. I exchanged contact information with a few of them, adding to my informal network of people dealing with HOA issues. That December marked 3 years since the storm. Sterling Meadows threw a holiday party at the community center, and I was invited as a guest of honor. They had even named the newly renovated backup generator facility the Armstrong Emergency Power Center, which was embarrassing but also kind of touching. I gave a brief speech at the party, keeping it light and thanking everyone for their hospitality over the years. I did not mention Brenda or the legal troubles. There was no point in dwelling on the past. Instead, I talked about community, resilience, and the importance of being prepared for whatever challenges Montana winters might throw at us. Afterward, a teenager approached me. He looked about 16, gangly and awkward in the way teenage boys often are. "Mr. Armstrong, I'm Tyler Henderson, Dale and Jennifer's son." "Hey, Tyler, I remember you from the storm, though you were a lot shorter then," he grinned. "I was 13. I'm 16 now. I wanted to thank you for what you did for my family. Mom still talks about how you helped her with her insulin. I'm glad I could help. It made me think about what I want to do with my life. I'm planning to study emergency management in college. I want to help communities prepare for disasters and respond when things go wrong." Something about that hit me hard. This kid had been shaped by the same events that had turned my life upside down, but in a positive way. He had seen crisis and response and had decided to dedicate himself to making things better. "That's fantastic, Tyler. The world needs more people who think that way. Will you write me a recommendation letter when I apply to colleges?" I shook his hand. I'd be honored. As winter settled in again, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed in 3 years. I was still the same rancher, still living on the same land, still running the same operation. But I was also more connected to my community, more aware of the ways individual actions could ripple outward, and more committed to helping where I could. My generator sat behind the barn, a quiet sentinel ready for the next emergency. The Sterling Meadows backup system was fully functional, professionally maintained and regularly tested. And most importantly, there was an understanding between us. When crisis came, we would work together, not against each other. The storm that had started all of this had been brutal and dangerous. But it had also stripped away pretense and forced everyone to confront what actually mattered. Not property values or aesthetic standards or HOA rules, but simple human decency. The willingness to help your neighbors when they needed it, even if those neighbors had not always been kind to you. Brenda Harrington was in federal prison, serving her sentence for fraud. I did not take any pleasure in that. Her downfall had been her own doing, the result of greed and poor judgment and an inability to see past her own narrow interests. But it was still a tragedy, a life derailed by bad decisions. Keith Murphy, her brother-in-law, was also incarcerated. His contracting business had gone bankrupt and his reputation was ruined. Again, I took no joy in it. These were consequences, not victories. What did feel like a victory was the transformation of Sterling Meadows itself. The community had learned and grown. They had implemented real oversight, created genuine emergency preparedness plans, and built a culture of transparency and accountability. They had turned a disaster into an opportunity for positive change. In February, I received a letter from the Montana State Legislature. They were considering a bill that would clarify property rights in situations where HOA rules conflicted with emergency preparedness measures. They asked if I would be willing to testify in support of the bill. I drove to Helena on a cold Tuesday morning and sat in a committee room that smelled like old wood and floor polish. I testified for 15 minutes, explaining my experience and arguing that homeowners should have the right to maintain backup power systems regardless of HOA aesthetic standards, provided those systems met safety regulations. The bill passed committee and eventually became law. It was a small victory, but it meant that other Montana property owners would not face the same harassment I had endured. The law included provisions for solar panels, generators, and other emergency equipment, protecting them from unreasonable HOA restrictions. Spring came, as it always does in Montana, with sudden warmth and rushing snowmelt. My cattle grazed on fresh grass, Scout chased rabbits through the fields, and life continued its eternal rhythm. One morning in April, I was fixing a fence line when I saw a car coming down my driveway. It was Carol Matthews, and she had a serious expression. "Patrick, we need to talk," my heart sank. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong exactly, but we have a situation I thought you should know about. We're getting new neighbors." "Okay, where?" "The lot adjacent to yours, the one that's been vacant since the development was built. Someone bought it and they're planning to build. That's their right, it's their land. The thing is, the buyer is Linda Murphy, Keith Murphy's wife." I stared at her. "You're kidding." I wish I was. "She's apparently using settlement money from a lawsuit against the HOA insurance company. She filed separately from her husband and won a judgment for emotional distress or something. Now she's building a house right next to your property, and people are worried it's some kind of revenge move." I thought about this for a long moment. Has she done anything threatening or illegal? No. She's followed all the proper procedures, submitted plans, gotten permits. It's all above board. Then there's nothing to worry about. She has the right to build on her own land just like anyone else. You're not concerned, should I be? If she causes problems, we'll deal with them, but I'm not going to assume the worst just because of who her husband is. She's not responsible for his crimes. Carol looked relieved. That's what I told the board, but some people wanted to try to block the sale or make things difficult for her. I thought that would be wrong. It would be. She's already been through hell because of what her husband did. The last thing she needs is more harassment. Linda Murphy's house went up over the summer. It was a modest structure by Sterling Meadows standards, maybe 2,500 square feet, with simple landscaping and a two-car garage. I saw her occasionally, a quiet woman in her 50s who kept to herself and did not cause any trouble. In August, she knocked on my door. "Mr. Armstrong, I'm Linda Murphy. I wanted to introduce myself since we're going to be neighbors." "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Murphy. Call me Patrick." I also wanted to apologize. I know what my husband did, and I know how it affected you and everyone in Sterling Meadows. I had no idea what he and Brenda were doing, but that doesn't excuse the harm they caused. You're not responsible for his actions. I know, but I still feel I should say something. You helped a lot of people during that storm, including some who probably didn't deserve it. That says a lot about who you are. We talked for a while, and I learned her story. She had divorced Keith shortly after his indictment, not wanting to be associated with his crimes. She had lost friends, her home, and her sense of security. The settlement money had given her a chance to start over, and she had chosen to stay in the area because her elderly parents lived in Bozeman. "Why Sterling Meadows, though?" I asked, given the history. "Because I want to prove that I'm not defined by what he did. I'm part of this community, and I'm going to be a good neighbor, even if some people don't want me here." I respected that. It took courage to face the consequences of someone else's actions and try to build a new life anyway. Over the following months, Linda became a quiet but positive presence in the community. She volunteered at the community center, participated in HOA meetings, and generally demonstrated that she was nothing like her ex-husband. People slowly warmed to her, recognizing that she was genuinely trying to make amends and move forward. That December, 4 years after the storm, we had another significant weather event. Not as severe as the original blizzard, but enough to knock out power for about 18 hours. My generator performed perfectly, and the Sterling Meadows backup system worked exactly as designed. No one froze, no one panicked, and the whole thing was handled smoothly. It was, in a strange way, the final validation. The systems we had put in place worked. The lessons we had learned held. The community had grown stronger through adversity. I stood on my porch that evening, watching the lights of Sterling Meadows glow in the darkness, powered by their backup generator. My own house was warm and bright behind me, my generator humming quietly in the distance. Scout was asleep by the fireplace, content and safe. 4 years ago, I had been fighting with an HOA president over a generator. Now, that president was in federal prison, the HOA was transformed, and I was an accepted part of a community I had never wanted to join. Life had a funny way of working out. I thought about all the people who had been part of this journey. Dale and Jennifer Henderson, who had trusted me when they needed help. Carol Matthews, who had stepped up to lead when leadership was needed. Tyler Henderson, who had been inspired to pursue emergency management. Susan Wright and her husband, who kept their accessibility ramp. The dozens of others who had written letters or shared stories or simply said thank you. And yes, even Brenda Harrington and Keith Murphy, who had taught everyone what happens when power goes unchecked and greed trumps responsibility. I did not regret any of it. The fight, the storm, the the legal proceedings, the publicity, none of it. Because at the end of the day, I had stood up for what was right. I had helped my neighbors when they needed it. And I had proved that sometimes the right kind of stubbornness and the willingness to let consequences play out can actually change things for the better. My generator would keep running for years to come, ready for the next emergency, the next crisis, the next moment when the lights went out and someone needed help. And I would be ready too, because that's what neighbors do. They prepare, they endure, and they help each other through the storms. The HOA had tried to ban my backup generator. Instead, they had discovered that some things are more important than rules, that emergency preparedness matters more than aesthetics, and that the person you try to punish might just be the person who saves you when everything falls apart. I let them freeze, in a sense. I let their system fail. I let them experience the consequences of their own poor decisions, but I never let the people freeze. The individuals who needed help got it without hesitation or condition. That distinction mattered. That distinction was everything. And now, 4 years later, we all understood it. The community was stronger, more prepared, and more united than it had ever been. My ranch continued to thrive, my cattle were healthy, and my relationships with my neighbors were built on mutual respect rather than HOA mandates. As I went inside and closed the door against the December cold, I smiled. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes it is just living well, helping others, and letting the truth speak for itself. My backup generator hummed in the distance, a steady, reliable sound that promised warmth and light and safety no matter what storms might come. And that, ultimately, was all I had ever wanted.